I'm Beverly, 67 years old now, looking back on the day my own flesh and blood told me I was a burden. When my arthritis crippled my hands too much to work, my son Brandon handed me $10 and said his new wife couldn't handle having me around. 40 years I'd given him everything, even my kidney when he was 21. I left with nothing but determination. What Brandon didn't know was that I had one secret asset that would change everything. If you're watching this, drop a comment about where you're from and hit that subscribe button to hear how a mother's love turned to unexpected fortune. I never planned to be a single mother, but life rarely follows our careful plans. I was just 19 when I met Harold, Brandon's father, at a diner in our small Michigan town. He was handsome with those piercing blue eyes that our son would later inherit. We married within 6 months, and Brandon came along a year later in 1979. Those early years were beautiful despite our struggles. Harold worked at the local factory while I took care of our little boy. Brandon was such a sweet child, always curious, always smiling. He had this little habit of bringing me dandelions from our yard, his small fist clutching the yellow flowers like they were precious gems. I pressed one in my Bible, and I still have it to this day. Our happiness shattered when Brandon was only 4. Harold's factory closed without warning, laying off hundreds in our community. The stress changed him. He started drinking, staying out late, and coming home with anger burning in those once gentle eyes. After 6 months of watching him spiral, I woke one morning to find his dresser emptied and a brief note. "I can't do this anymore." Just like that, I became everything to Brandon: mother, father, provider, protector. I'd never finished college, having dropped out when I got pregnant, so my options were limited. I found work at the same diner where I'd met Harold, taking double shifts that left my feet throbbing but put food on our table. "Mommy, when is Daddy coming back?" Brandon would ask, his innocent eyes searching mine for answers I couldn't give. "I don't know, sweetheart," I'd reply, holding him close. "But we have each other, and that's what matters most." Our apartment was tiny, just one bedroom that I gave to Brandon while I slept on a pull-out couch. The walls were thin, the plumbing temperamental, but I made it homey with second-hand finds and curtains I sewed myself. I'd stay up late mending Brandon's clothes, stretching every dollar until it screamed. When Brandon started school, I rearranged my shifts to be home when he returned. My manager Gladys, a grandmother herself, understood and helped when she could. Sometimes Brandon would sit in a booth at the diner, doing homework while I served customers. Regular patrons would slip him quarters for the gumball machine, or help him with math problems. "You're raising a fine boy, Beverly," they'd tell me, and pride would momentarily outweigh my exhaustion. When Brandon was 7, he got terribly sick with a high fever that wouldn't break. I rushed him to the emergency room, terrified and praying. The diagnosis came back: kidney infection severe enough to cause damage. The doctor explained he might have ongoing problems, possibly even need a transplant someday. "I'll give him mine if he needs it," I told the doctor without hesitation. "Just tell me what to do to keep him healthy." That marked the beginning of years of medical appointments, special diets, and medications that strained our already tight budget. I took on a third job cleaning offices at night, often working 18 hours a day. While Brandon slept, I'd scrub floors and toilets, my hands raw from cleaning chemicals, but never once did I complain. This was what mothers did, whatever it took. Despite his health challenges, Brandon thrived in school. He was bright, earning excellent grades and the favor of his teachers. I couldn't afford extracurricular activities, but the school's basketball coach waived the fees when he saw Brandon's natural talent. I rearranged my schedule again to attend every game, cheering until my voice gave out even when I'd been on my feet all day. By the time Brandon reached high school, his kidney condition had stabilized with medication, but the doctors warned it might worsen as he grew older. I started a special savings account for his potential medical needs, putting away $5 here, $10 there, small amounts that accumulated slowly but steadily. Brandon's teenage years brought the usual challenges: mood swings, growing independence, occasional rebellion. But he remained essentially good-hearted, helping elderly neighbors with yard work, and holding down a part-time job at the local grocery store. "You've done well with him," my friend Patty remarked once, "especially doing it all on your own." I smiled, watching Brandon bag groceries with care. He's done well despite everything. That's all him. What I didn't share with Patty was how much I worried about the future. Brandon had dreams of college, and I had precisely $6,721 saved after 14 years nowhere near enough. His grades might earn scholarships, but what about living expenses? Books? The medication he still needed? When the college acceptance letter started arriving in his senior year, I felt both immense pride and gnawing anxiety. Brandon had been accepted to State University with a partial academic scholarship. We sat at our small kitchen table calculating costs. "Mom, I can work while studying," he insisted. "Maybe take out some loans." I shook my head firmly. "Absolutely not. You focus on your studies. I'll figure something out." And I did. I refinanced our small apartment, took a loan against my meager retirement fund, and sold the only valuable thing I owned, my mother's antique pearl necklace. It broke my heart to part with that family heirloom, but seeing Brandon's face when I told him he could go to State without worrying about money, that was worth more than any pearls. Brandon left for college in August 1997, the car packed with second-hand furniture, and the new computer I'd purchased on an installment plan. As I hugged him goodbye, I felt a strange mixture of loss and triumph. My boy was going to get the education I never had. "Call me tonight when you're settled," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I will, Mom," he promised, his excitement evident as he drove away. He did call that night and regularly during those first few months. I lived for those conversations, listening eagerly as he described classes, professors, and new friends. He seemed to be thriving, and I worked extra shifts to send care packages with homemade cookies and the toiletries he always forgot to buy. The first Thanksgiving break, I noticed subtle changes. Brandon's vocabulary had expanded, his mannerisms slightly altered. He spoke about philosophical concepts I couldn't fully grasp and referenced books I'd never read. I was proud, if sometimes lost in our conversations. "Mom, it's especially, not especially." He corrected me over dinner when I was telling him about our neighbor's new baby. I laughed it off. College is already paying off, I see. But as his freshman year progressed, the calls became less frequent. When I called him, he often seemed rushed, ending our conversations with vague excuses about study groups or social events. I told myself this was normal, healthy even. He was building his own life. During his sophomore year, Brandon's kidney condition worsened suddenly. The college health center sent him to the hospital, and I drove 4 hours in a blinding rainstorm to be with him. The doctors were concerned, mentioning transplant for the first time since he was a child. "I'm still willing," I immediately told the specialist. "Test me. If I'm a match, he can have my kidney." Brandon recovered without needing a transplant that time, but the scare brought us closer again. He seemed touched by my unhesitating offer, and for a while, our relationship returned to its former warmth. That summer, Brandon announced he wouldn't be coming home. He'd been offered an internship with a prestigious accounting firm in the city, an opportunity too good to pass up. I swallowed my disappointment and congratulated him, sending half my paycheck to help with his security deposit on an apartment near the firm. When junior year began, the distance between us grew again. Brandon joined a fraternity, and his new friends came from wealthy families with vacation homes and European cars. When I visited campus that fall, bringing a home-cooked meal to his dorm, I noticed his embarrassment as he introduced me to his roommate. "This is my mom," he said simply, offering no warm anecdotes or inside jokes as he had in the past. His roommate, Derek, gave me a quick handshake before excusing himself. Once he'd left, Brandon sighed. "Mom, you should have called before coming. I have plans tonight." I packed up the uneaten food, hurt but understanding. "Of course. You're busy. I just wanted to see you." As I drove home, I recalled how Brandon had once begged me to chaperone his middle school dances, just to have me around. How quickly things change. The real shock came during Parents' Weekend his senior year. I'd saved for months to attend, buying a new dress from the clearance rack and splurging on a haircut. Brandon had initially discouraged me from coming. "It's not that big a deal, Mom. Just boring speeches and overpriced dinners." But I insisted, and he reluctantly agreed to meet me for lunch at a campus cafe. When I arrived, Brandon was sitting with a young woman who exuded confidence and sophistication. "Mom, this is Heather," he said. "My girlfriend." Heather's handshake was firm, her smile polite but evaluating. "Brandon's told me so much about you," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Throughout lunch, Brandon and Heather discussed professors and theories, occasionally exchanging glances when I asked questions they deemed simplistic. When I mentioned the diner where I still worked, Brandon quickly changed the subject. Later, walking around campus, we passed a group of Brandon's fraternity brothers. He introduced me briefly, then hurried me along. "Why are we rushing?" I asked. "They're heading to the dean's reception. We don't have tickets for that." I learned from the campus schedule that tickets were free for all visiting parents. That evening in my budget motel room, I called my friend Patty in tears. "He's ashamed of me," I confessed. "My own son. He's just at that age," Patty consoled. "They all go through it. He'll come around." I wanted to believe her, but something had shifted fundamentally. The boy who once proudly introduced me as my mom who works harder than anyone, now seemed to view me as an embarrassment, a reminder of humble beginnings he'd rather forget. Still, I reminded myself that parenting sometimes meant weathering storms of ingratitude. I'd continue supporting him however I could, trusting that maturity would eventually restore his perspective. I had no idea then how severe the coming storm would be, or that it would begin with a diagnosis that would change everything. The pain started in my hands, just stiffness at first, easily dismissed as the consequence of decades of manual labor. By early 2003, several months after Brandon's graduation, the pain had become my constant companion. My fingers swelled, making even simple tasks like buttoning my uniform excruciating. "You need to see a doctor," Gladys insisted one day when I dropped a coffee pot, my grip failing without warning. I resisted, concerned about the cost and time away from work. But when I could no longer write orders without tears forming, I finally relented. The diagnosis came after several tests. Rheumatoid arthritis, aggressive and already causing significant joint damage. The rheumatologist recommended immediate treatment with expensive medications and warned that without them, I might lose function in my hands completely. "Do you have good insurance?" he asked, reviewing the treatment plan. I shook my head. My diner job provided only basic coverage with a high deductible, and my cleaning work was off the books. The doctor looked concerned but prescribed the medications anyway. Along with physical therapy I knew I couldn't afford. Brandon had moved to the city by then, working at the accounting firm where he'd interned. He shared an apartment with Heather, who'd also found a job there after graduation. Their relationship had become serious, with marriage discussions underway. When I called to tell him about my diagnosis, his initial response was appropriate concern. "That sounds serious, Mom. Are you going to be okay?" "The doctor says with treatment, I should be able to manage it," I explained, not mentioning the cost worries. "How are you and Heather doing?" Brandon shared news about a promotion at work and Heather's recent accomplishments. Only at the end of our conversation did he ask, "Will you still be able to work?" That question revealed his primary concern, and it stung. Still, I understood. He was building his life, and I'd always emphasized independence. "I'm figuring it out," I assured him. The truth was far more dire. Within 2 months, I could no longer handle the physical demands of waitressing. Gladys kept me on for as long as possible, shifting me to the cash register, but even counting change became difficult. The cleaning job was impossible with my inflamed joints. My income dwindled as my medical bills mounted. When I could no longer make rent, I swallowed my pride and called Brandon. "I hate to ask this," I began, "but I'm in a tough spot financially. The arthritis has made it impossible to work full-time, and my medical expenses are overwhelming. I might need a small loan until I figure something out." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Mom, Heather and I just put a down payment on a condo. Our budget is really tight right now." "I understand," I said quickly. "It was just a thought." After another moment of uncomfortable silence, Brandon offered, "Maybe you could come stay with us for a little while? Until you get back on your feet." His reluctance was palpable, but I was rapidly running out of options. My landlord had already given me an extension, and my savings were depleted from medical costs. With profound humility, I accepted his offer. 2 weeks later, I arrived at their sleek high-rise building with 2 suitcases containing the remnants of my life. The doorman looked skeptical as he directed me to the elevator, perhaps wondering what someone like me was doing in such an upscale residence. Brandon greeted me with an awkward hug, quickly taking my bags. The condo was stunning. All modern furnishings and floor-to-ceiling windows with city views. Heather emerged from another room, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Welcome, Beverly," she said formally. "Brandon, show your mother to the guest room." The guest room was small but elegantly appointed. Brandon placed my suitcases by the bed and explained the bathroom situation. "We share the hall bath, so maybe we can work out a schedule?" I nodded, suddenly feeling like an intruder rather than family. "Thank you for doing this. It won't be for long, I promise." "Of course," he said, already backing toward the door. "Make yourself comfortable. Heather and I have dinner reservations, but there's sandwich stuff in the fridge." They left shortly after, leaving me alone in their pristine home. I sat on the edge of the bed, my swollen hands resting uselessly in my lap, wondering how we'd arrived at this point. The next few weeks established an uncomfortable pattern. Brandon and Heather left early for work and returned late, often going straight to their bedroom with brief greetings. I tried to make myself useful, attempting to cook or clean despite my painful hands, but Heather preferred things done her way. "You don't need to do that," she'd say, redoing whatever task I'd attempted. "We have a cleaning service." I overheard them arguing one night, their voices carrying through the thin walls. "How long is she staying?" Heather demanded. "It's been 3 weeks already. What am I supposed to do?" Brandon countered. "She's my mother. She's draining our resources. Have you seen our electric bill since she arrived?" I lay awake that night, tears silently soaking my pillow. The next morning, I approached Brandon before he left for work. "I've been thinking about applying for disability," I said. "Once that comes through, I can find my own place." Relief flashed across his face. "That's a good plan, Mom. Very responsible." What I didn't tell him was that disability applications often took months or even years to approve, with frequent denials requiring appeals. I'd already submitted my paperwork, but the caseworker warned me not to expect quick results. As my second month in their home began, tensions escalated. Heather began leaving passive-aggressive notes about water usage and grocery consumption. Brandon stayed later at the office, clearly avoiding the situation at home. The breaking point came when Heather discovered I'd been using her expensive hand cream, the only thing that seemed to soothe my inflamed joints. "That cost $80, she exclaimed, holding the nearly empty container. "Did you think we wouldn't notice?" Brandon, witnessing the confrontation, seemed torn between loyalty to his fiancée and duty to his mother. "Mom, we're happy to help, but you need to respect our things," he said finally, siding with Heather. I apologized immediately, mortified and heartbroken. "I'll replace it with my next disability check." Heather scoffed. "When will that be? You haven't received any money yet." That evening, I heard them in serious discussion behind their closed bedroom door. The next morning, Brandon approached me as I struggled to button my cardigan. "Mom, Heather and I have been talking," he began, his expression serious. "This arrangement isn't working out." My heart sank, but I nodded. "I understand. I'll try to find another solution. The thing is," he continued, not meeting my eyes, "we're planning to get married soon and we really need our space. We think it would be best if you looked into assisted living options." "Assisted living?" I repeated, stunned. "Brandon, I'm only 62. I have arthritis, not dementia. They have places for people with physical limitations," he explained, as if he'd researched this thoroughly. "There are government programs that might help with the cost." I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Brandon's face. "I raised you by myself. I gave you everything, including my kidney when you needed it. And now you want to put me in a home." His expression hardened. "That was your choice, Mom. No one forced you to donate your kidney." The cruelty of his words knocked the breath from my lungs. "I did it because I love you," I whispered. "I would have given you both kidneys if I could have." Brandon sighed impatiently. "This isn't about the kidney. It's about boundaries. Heather and I need our life back. How long do I have?" I asked, my voice hollow. "We think 2 weeks is reasonable," he replied, as if discussing a business transaction. "Here's some money to help with your transition." He placed a $10 bill on the table between us. I looked at the money, then back at my son. $10? That's what I'm worth to you. It's all I have in cash right now, he said defensively. Once you're settled somewhere, maybe we can discuss additional support. In that moment, something inside me broke and reformed. I stood up, my painful joints protesting the sudden movement. "Keep your money," I said with newfound dignity. "I'll be gone by tomorrow." Brandon seemed surprised by my response but nodded. "That would be appreciated." That night, as Brandon and Heather went out for dinner, I made some difficult phone calls. My old friend Patty agreed to let me stay on her couch temporarily. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than the street. As I packed my meager belongings, I came across an old envelope tucked in my Bible, the deed to a small piece of land my grandfather had left me decades ago. It was just 5 acres of seemingly worthless woodland in northern Michigan that I'd completely forgotten about. I tucked it back in the Bible, thinking it too insignificant to matter now. The next morning, I left before Brandon and Heather woke up. I placed my key on the counter alongside a note. "Thank you for your hospitality. I release you from any obligation toward me. Live well, Mom." With my 2 suitcases and $10 I ultimately decided to take, I stepped into an uncertain future, my heart broken but my spirit somehow undefeated. Patty's 1-bedroom apartment wasn't designed for 2 people, especially when one had mobility issues. Her couch was lumpy, aggravating my already painful joints, but her kindness made the discomfort bearable. After a lifetime of independence, however, relying on charity was its own kind of pain. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Patty insisted, though we both knew her small space couldn't accommodate a permanent arrangement. 2 weeks into my stay, I received a surprising phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Beverly Mitchell?" a male voice inquired. "Yes, it is," I confirmed cautiously. "This is Robert Jenkins from Northern Resources Development. I'm calling about your property in Lakeville Township." I almost dismissed it as a scam before remembering my grandfather's land. The 5 acres I inherited? What about it? "Ms. Mitchell, there's been significant interest in that area recently. Our company would like to discuss purchasing your parcel." Skeptical but curious, I agreed to meet with Mr. Jenkins the following day at Patty's apartment. He arrived promptly, a middle-aged man in a business suit carrying a leather portfolio. "Thank you for seeing me," he began after introductions. "As I mentioned, Northern Resources is interested in acquiring properties in Lakeville Township due to recent geological surveys." "What kind of surveys?" I asked. He opened his portfolio, revealing maps and technical documents. "Preliminary studies indicate significant natural gas deposits in the shale formation beneath that region. Your 5 acres sit at a particularly valuable juncture. My grandfather had purchased that land in the 1950s for hunting, considering it nothing more than woods and wetlands. Now this man was suggesting it might have value? What exactly are you offering?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Northern Resources is prepared to make an initial offer of $1,300,000 for mineral rights, with additional royalties if extraction proves successful. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "Did you say million?" Mr. Jenkins nodded. "The offer reflects current market valuation for properties in that geological formation. Of course, you're welcome to consult with an attorney before making any decisions." After he left, Patty and I sat in stunned silence. "Did that just happen?" she finally asked. "I think it did," I replied, staring at the business card and preliminary offer letter he'd left. The next day, I contacted a lawyer specializing in mineral rights, an expense I couldn't really afford but knew was necessary. After reviewing the documents and conducting her own research, she confirmed the legitimacy of the offer but suggested negotiating for better terms. "This company isn't the only one interested in that region," she explained. "We could potentially secure a better deal through competitive bidding." With her guidance, I entered negotiations with Northern Resources and 2 other energy companies that expressed interest once word spread. The process took nearly 2 months, during which I continued staying with Patty, while my disability application remained in bureaucratic limbo. The final agreement exceeded all expectations. $2.7 million for the mineral rights, plus annual royalties of 15% on any gas extracted. The lawyer earned her substantial fee many times over. When the funds were finally deposited in my newly established bank account, I sat in the bank manager's office, staring at the balance in disbelief. From destitute to millionaire in one surreal transaction. "Ms. Mitchell, would you like to discuss investment options?" the manager asked. I looked down at my swollen hands, thinking of all the years they'd worked without complaint, and now, through no effort of mine, this windfall. "Yes," I replied. "But first, I need to take care of some immediate matters." That afternoon, I rented a modest one-bedroom apartment in a building with elevator access and safety features for residents with mobility issues. I scheduled appointments with specialists recommended for my condition, no longer constrained by insurance limitations or cost concerns. The new medications and treatments weren't miraculous, but they significantly improved my quality of life. Physical therapy strengthened my remaining function, and custom splints reduced pain during activities. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt hope for managing my condition rather than being consumed by it. With my immediate needs addressed, I turned to financial planning. My advisor helped structure investments to provide stable income while preserving principal. I established a trust for healthcare expenses and made provisions for my future needs. Through it all, Brandon remained unaware of my changed circumstances. He hadn't contacted me since I left his condo, and pride prevented me from reaching out. Sometimes I would drive past his building, wondering if he ever thought about me, if he ever regretted his actions. But I never stopped. 6 months into my new life, I received an unexpected call from Gladys, my former manager at the diner. "Beverly, I'm retiring next month," she announced. "The owners are selling the place and I thought of you." "Me? What about me? Remember how you always said you'd run things differently if you owned the place? Well, now you could." The idea was simultaneously absurd and compelling. I had no business experience beyond managing my household budget. Yet I knew that diner intimately, its rhythms, its customers, its potential. After careful consideration and consultations with my financial advisor, I made an offer on the diner. The negotiation was straightforward, and within weeks, I became the proud owner of the very establishment where I'd worked for 27 years. "What will you call it?" Patty asked as we toured the space, now temporarily closed for renovations. I considered this for a moment. "Second chances," I decided. Because everyone deserves one. The renovation transformed the tired diner into a warm, welcoming space while maintaining its classic charm. I installed ergonomic features in the kitchen and service areas, making it accessible for workers with physical limitations like mine. When hiring staff, I prioritized single parents and older workers often overlooked by other employers. Second chances opened to immediate success, partly from curious locals and partly from genuine appreciation for our quality comfort food and inclusive atmosphere. I worked shortened shifts as a hostess, my medications allowing enough function to greet customers and oversee operations without overtaxing my body. The business thrived and I found purpose beyond managing my condition. I established a small foundation providing emergency assistance to working parents facing medical crises, paying forward the blessing I'd received through my grandfather's forgotten legacy. Throughout this transformation, I thought often of Brandon. Despite his cruelty, he remained my son, the little boy who once brought me dandelions. I wondered if he ever drove past the diner, if he'd heard about my change in fortune. The answer came exactly 1 year after he'd handed me that $10 bill and asked me to leave. It was a busy Saturday morning at Second Chances. The weekend breakfast rush had the dining room filled to capacity, with a short waiting list for tables. I was at my usual post near the entrance, checking reservations and chatting with regulars, when the door opened and Brandon walked in. He didn't notice me at first, his eyes scanning the crowded diner. He'd lost weight, and shadows beneath his eyes suggested recent stress. Beside him stood Heather, looking equally tired but impeccably dressed as always. When his gaze finally found me, confusion crossed his face, followed by shock as he took in my tailored dress and the nameplate on my lapel identifying me as the owner. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible above the diner's cheerful clamor. I maintained my professional smile. Good morning. Table for two. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Heather nudged him, clearly uncomfortable with the public setting for this reunion. Yes, please, she answered when Brandon couldn't. I checked my reservation book, though I already knew the wait time. It'll be about 20 minutes. Would you like to wait at the counter? Coffee is complimentary for waiting guests. Brandon seemed to find his voice. Mom, what is this? You own this place. Several nearby customers looked over with interest. I kept my tone pleasant but neutral. Yes, I purchased it last year. Rachel will show you to the counter if you'd like to wait. I nodded to my assistant, who stepped forward with menus. Brandon didn't move. Can we talk? He asked. Privately. I considered this request, noting the growing discomfort on Heather's face and the curious glances from my staff and customers. I have a short break in 30 minutes. You're welcome to wait in my office then. Brandon nodded and they followed Rachel to the counter. I continued greeting customers and managing the seating chart, professionally detached despite my racing heart. When my scheduled break arrived, I asked Rachel to cover the front and made my way to the small office at the back of the diner. Brandon and Heather were already waiting, having been escorted there by my assistant manager. The space was modest but well appointed, with framed vintage diner advertisements on the walls, and a desk that accommodated my ergonomic needs. Please sit down, I said, indicating the chairs opposite my desk. Brandon remained standing. Mom, what happened? How did you? He gestured vaguely, encompassing the diner, my appearance, everything. I came into an unexpected inheritance, I said simply. My grandfather's land turned out to have value. But why didn't you tell me? His tone held accusation rather than remorse. I looked at him steadily. When exactly should I have told you, Brandon? After you gave me $10 in 2 weeks to leave your home? Or perhaps while I was sleeping on Patty's couch? Heather had the grace to look ashamed, studying her manicured nails intently. That wasn't. Brandon began then stopped. Things were complicated then. Yes, they were, I agreed. For all of us. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Brandon sat down. You look good, Mom. Better. Is your arthritis? It's managed, not cured. The right treatments make a significant difference, but it's still a daily challenge. He nodded, seeming genuinely relieved. I'm glad. I worried about how you were doing. The statement hung in the air, its insincerity evident given his complete absence from my life. Did you? I asked quietly. Because you never called to check. Brandon had the decency to flush. I thought you wouldn't want to hear from me after everything. That's convenient, I observed. A reason to absolve yourself of responsibility that requires no actual effort on your part. Heather cleared her throat. Beverly, we're both very happy to see you doing so well. I turned my attention to her. Thank you, Heather. How are wedding plans progressing? Her surprise at my knowledge was obvious. Brandon answered for her. We postponed the wedding. There were some financial issues. This was unexpected. Brandon had been on a promising career trajectory when I last knew of his circumstances. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it despite everything. Brandon glanced at Heather, who gave a slight nod. He took a deep breath. The truth is, Mom, I lost my job 6 months ago. The firm downsized after losing some major clients. I've been doing freelance accounting work, but it's not steady. We had to sell the condo and move to a smaller apartment. Now I understood their worn appearance. Life had delivered to Brandon some of the insecurity he'd dismissed when it was my reality. That sounds challenging, I said carefully. It has been, he agreed, tension visible in his shoulders. And it's made me think about things. About how I treated you. Here it was, the conversation I'd imagined countless times during sleepless nights. In my fantasies, I'd responded with either righteous anger or magnanimous forgiveness. The reality felt more complicated. Brandon, I said, my voice softening slightly, why did you come here today? He exchanged another glance with Heather before answering. We saw an article about second chances in the local business journal. It had your picture. I couldn't believe it was you, owning a successful restaurant after everything I needed to see for myself. And now you have, I noted. What is it you want from me? The bluntness of my question seemed to catch him off guard. He shifted uncomfortably. I thought, maybe we could talk. Start over somehow. Heather interjected, her voice tentative. We've both realized we made terrible mistakes, Beverly. Brandon has been. He's really struggled with what happened. I studied them both, noting the designer watch still on Brandon's wrist despite his financial troubles, the expensive handbag at Heather's feet. Some priorities hadn't changed, it seemed. Struggled enough to apologize? I asked. Because I haven't heard that yet. Brandon's face reddened.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I was wrong. The way I treated you was unforgivable. Yet here you are seeking forgiveness, I observed. Not just forgiveness, he said quickly. A relationship. I miss you. Or perhaps what he missed was the security of having a safety net, now that he understood vulnerability firsthand. The timing of this reconciliation attempt seemed suspiciously aligned with his discovery of my improved circumstances. My break time was nearly over. I could hear the continued bustle of the diner beyond my office door, customers enjoying meals, staff efficiently serving them. The life I'd built from the ashes of rejection. I appreciate you coming, I said finally. And I accept your apology. But rebuilding trust takes time. Hope flickered in his eyes. Does that mean we can see each other again? I considered this carefully. Despite everything, he was still my son. The child I'd carried, raised, sacrificed for. Love doesn't simply vanish, even when deeply wounded. I'm willing to have lunch with you next week, I offered. Just the two of us to start. We can talk more then. Relief washed over his features. Thank you, Mom. That would be great. But Brandon, I added, I need to be clear about something. If we rebuild our relationship, it will be as equals. I'm not your backup plan or your safety net. I'm your mother who deserves respect. He nodded quickly. Of course. Absolutely. As they rose to leave, Heather hesitated, then stepped forward. Beverly, for what it's worth, I was wrong too. The way I behaved in our home.
I'm truly sorry.
Her apology seemed genuine, though whether motivated by conscience or circumstance remained unclear. Thank you, Heather, I acknowledged. I appreciate that. I walked them through the diner to the exit, aware of curious eyes following our progress. At the door, Brandon turned. That $10, he said quietly. I think about it all the time. How insulting it must have been. I smiled slightly. It's funny how life works. That $10 was exactly what I needed for bus fare to Patty's apartment. Sometimes even the wrong thing can serve the right purpose. After they left, I returned to my hostess station, greeting the next customers with genuine warmth despite my emotional turbulence. Later that evening, alone in my comfortable apartment, I took out my Bible and the pressed dandelion from Brandon's childhood. The simple flower had long since turned brittle and brown, but it remained intact, a testament to endurance. Like me. The week before my scheduled lunch with Brandon passed quickly. Second chances continued thriving, and I found myself genuinely busy with business decisions and community involvement. The restaurant had become more than a financial investment. It was the center of a growing community of employees and regular customers who felt like extended family. I chose a neutral location for our meeting, neither second chances nor anywhere associated with Brandon's current life. The small cafe downtown offered privacy and excellent food without the emotional baggage of familiar settings. Brandon arrived 15 minutes early, already seated when I entered. He stood immediately, pulling out my chair with an awkwardness that reminded me of his teenage years. He'd gotten a haircut since our last encounter, and wore a button-down shirt that looked newly purchased. You look nice, I commented as I settled in. Thanks. You too, he replied, his fingers fidgeting with the menu. How's the diner doing? Very well. We're considering extending our hours to include dinner service. Brandon nodded, clearly trying to show interest in my business. That sounds like a good opportunity. Our conversation maintained this level of polite superficiality through ordering and the arrival of our meals. We discussed the unusually mild weather, changes to the downtown area, neutral topics that required no emotional investment. Finally, as we finished eating, Brandon set down his fork with deliberate care. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About why I treated you the way I did. I waited, giving him space to continue. When I was growing up, you were always so strong. You handled everything, my kidney problems, working multiple jobs, all of it. I never saw you break. He paused, collecting his thoughts. When you got sick and needed help, I didn't know how to handle it. It was like the world had turned upside down. My strong mom suddenly seemed vulnerable. And instead of stepping up, I pulled away. I let Heather's concerns about our space and finances override what I knew was right. That explains it, I acknowledged. But it doesn't excuse it. No, he agreed quickly. Nothing excuses it. I've just been trying to understand my own behavior, and I think part of it was fear. If you weren't the invincible mom I'd always counted on, what did that mean for me? I considered this perspective. There was some truth to it. I had always presented a strong front, hiding my fears and exhaustion from Brandon throughout his childhood. Perhaps that unintentionally set an impossible standard. We all have vulnerabilities, I said. Even mothers. I know that now, he replied. Losing my job, facing financial insecurity. It's given me a tiny glimpse of what you dealt with for decades. And you did it while raising me alone. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, genuine emotion breaking through his composed exterior. Tell me about your job situation, I prompted, wanting to understand his current circumstances better. Brandon explained that after his initial layoff, he'd found temporary consulting work that recently ended. He was interviewing for permanent positions, but facing competition from younger graduates willing to work for lower salaries. It's humbling, he admitted. I thought my career path was set, that success was guaranteed if I just followed the right steps. Now I'm learning how quickly everything can change. Yes, I agreed. Life has a way of teaching those lessons. He looked down at his empty plate. Mom, I want you to know that I'm not here because of your money. When I saw that article about your restaurant, my first feeling wasn't calculation, it was shame. Shame that you'd achieved all this after I'd abandoned you, and pride that you were strong enough to build something so meaningful. I studied my son's face, searching for sincerity and finding what appeared to be genuine remorse. I believe you want to make amends, I said carefully. But trust once broken isn't easily repaired. It requires consistent action over time. I understand, he nodded. I'm willing to put in that work, however long it takes. Then let's start simply, I suggested. Weekly phone calls. Monthly lunches. We rebuild gradually. Relief washed over his features. I'd like that very much. As we prepared to leave, Brandon hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. I brought something for you. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a $10 bill and a short handwritten note. This doesn't begin to repay what I owe you, but it's a start. With love and deepest regret, Brandon. The gesture was symbolic but meaningful. I tucked the envelope into my purse. Thank you, I said simply. Outside the cafe, we parted with a brief, slightly awkward hug. Physical contact that felt both familiar and strange after our estrangement. As I watched him walk away, I reflected on the complex journey that had brought us to this point. True to his word, Brandon called the following Sunday. Our conversation was still somewhat stilted, but he made genuine efforts to ask about my life and share details of his own. The next week he called again. And the next. Our monthly lunches expanded to include occasional dinners. Brandon found a new job, less prestigious than his previous position but stable. He and Heather postponed their wedding indefinitely, focusing instead on rebuilding their financial security. 3 months into our cautious reconciliation, Brandon asked if he could bring Heather to our next dinner. I agreed, curious about whether their relationship had evolved as Brandon himself seemed to be changing. The dinner revealed subtle but significant shifts in their dynamic. Heather spoke less about status symbols and more about community volunteering she'd recently begun. Brandon openly acknowledged my expertise when the conversation turned to business matters. They seemed more grounded, less concerned with appearances. We've been talking about starting a financial literacy program for high school students, Heather mentioned. Brandon's accounting background combined with real-world experience could be valuable. That sounds worthwhile. I agreed, pleasantly surprised by this new direction. As our relationship gradually healed, I maintained clear boundaries. I never offered financial assistance, though I had the means. When Brandon mentioned struggling with student loan payments, I listened sympathetically but didn't volunteer solutions. This wasn't cruelty but a necessary part of our new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than dependency. 6 months after our reconciliation began, Brandon called with unexpected news. "Heather and I are moving," he announced. "I've been offered a position with a nonprofit that provides accounting services to small businesses. It's in Lakeville Township." The location was significant, the same area where my grandfather's land had yielded such unexpected value. "That's quite a coincidence," I observed. "Not entirely," Brandon admitted. "After everything that happened with your property there, I researched the region. The economic development following the natural gas discovery has created opportunities. The salary is less than I made before, but the cost of living is lower, and the work feels meaningful." I was impressed by this thoughtful approach, so different from his previous focus on prestige. "It sounds like a good fit," I said. "When do you move?" "Next month. We found a small house to rent. It's nothing fancy, but it's in a nice neighborhood." As he described their plans, I heard a maturity in his voice that had been absent before. His priorities had shifted, values realigned by difficulty and reflection. The day before Brandon and Heather's move, they invited me to dinner at their apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a working-class neighborhood, dramatically different from their luxury condo. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable, the overall atmosphere warm rather than showcase perfect. After dinner, Brandon handed me a small gift box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a miniature dandelion preserved in clear resin. "I remember how I used to bring you dandelions as a kid," he explained. "You always acted like they were precious roses." "They were precious," I told him, fastening the bracelet around my wrist. "Because they came from you." Heather excused herself to make coffee, giving us a moment alone. "Mom," Brandon said quietly, "I want you to know something. The work I've done to rebuild our relationship, it isn't contingent on forgiveness. I'll keep showing up whether you ever fully forgive me or not." His words touched me deeply. "I do forgive you, Brandon, not because what happened doesn't matter, but because holding on to hurt serves no purpose. We're building something new now." He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you. That means everything." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on our extraordinary journey. From the single mother struggling to provide, to the betrayal that shattered my world, to unexpected fortune and gradual reconciliation, none of it had followed any path I could have anticipated. The arthritis in my hand still flared painfully some days. The memory of that $10 bill and Brandon's cruel dismissal hadn't completely faded. But alongside those difficulties existed new joys. A thriving business, financial security, and a relationship with my son built on more honest foundations than before. Sometimes the deepest wounds, when finally healed, leave us stronger in the broken places. 1 year after Brandon and Heather moved to Lakeville Township, I received an invitation to the grand opening of their new venture, a financial counseling center specifically designed to help families navigating medical crises. The name printed on the invitation card brought tears to my eyes. $10 lessons. When I arrived for the opening celebration, I was surprised by the modest but well-designed office space they'd created. Instead of the sleek corporate aesthetic Brandon had once favored, the center featured comfortable furnishings, accessible design elements, and walls decorated with inspiring quotes about resilience. "What do you think?" Brandon asked anxiously as he showed me around. "It's wonderful," I replied honestly, "but I'm curious about the name." He led me to a frame display in the reception area. Behind glass was a $10 bill, the very one he'd given me that day in his condo. "This represents the moment I failed most profoundly as a son and as a human being," he explained. "We display it here as a reminder that our lowest moments don't have to define us, but they can teach us if we're willing to learn." Beside the framed bill hung a mission statement. $10 Lessons provides compassionate financial guidance to families facing medical hardships, believing that vulnerability should be met with support, not judgment. The center offered free consultations for families dealing with health crises, sliding-scale financial planning services, and workshops on navigating insurance, disability applications, and medical billing. Brandon's accounting expertise combined with his personal experience created a uniquely empathetic approach. Heather, who had completed social work certification, handled client intake and connected families with additional community resources. The transformation in her was perhaps even more striking than Brandon's. From status-conscious corporate climber to passionate advocate for vulnerable families. As I observed them interacting with clients and community members at the opening, I felt a profound sense of pride that transcended our difficult history. They had taken painful lessons and transformed them into meaningful service. Later that evening, during the small reception following the opening, Brandon clinked his glass for attention. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," he began. "But most importantly, I want to acknowledge the person who made this possible through her example." He turned toward me, his expression serious. "My mother taught me about resilience long before I understood what the word meant. She raised me alone, worked multiple jobs when I was sick, and even donated her kidney to me without hesitation." Several guests murmured in surprise at this revelation. "But the greatest lesson she taught me came after I betrayed her trust in the worst way possible," Brandon continued. "When she needed me most, I failed her completely. I gave her $10 in 2 weeks to leave my home when her arthritis made it impossible for her to work." The room had gone completely silent. "Mom, I know we've discussed this privately, but I want to say publicly that I am profoundly sorry for the pain I caused you. Your grace and forgiveness showed me what true strength looks like." Heather stepped forward to stand beside him. "Beverly gave us a precious gift by allowing us the opportunity to earn back her trust. That's a model we hope to extend to our clients. Second chances that honor dignity." The sincerity in their words moved me deeply. This public acknowledgement represented a level of accountability I hadn't requested but deeply appreciated. When I returned home that evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought us all to this point. My arthritis was acting up, my hands stiff and painful despite the best treatments money could buy. Some physical realities couldn't be changed, only managed. Yet alongside the physical discomfort existed a profound sense of peace. My relationship with Brandon had transformed into something I'd never anticipated. A genuine friendship between adults who had seen each other at their worst and chosen connection anyway. The following morning at Second Chances, I shared the story of Brandon's center with Patty, who still visited regularly though she'd moved to be closer to her grandchildren. "Who would have thought things would turn out this way?" she marveled. "From $10 to all this? Life rarely follows a straight line," I replied, watching my staff prepare for the breakfast rush. "The detours teach us the most important lessons." In the years that followed, both our ventures flourished. Second Chances expanded to a second location, maintaining our commitment to inclusive hiring practices. $10 lessons became a respected resource in the region, eventually securing grant funding to serve more families. Brandon and Heather finally married in a simple ceremony at a local park, with me as matron of honor. They later welcomed twins, a boy and girl who knew me only as the doting grandmother who owned a restaurant with the best pancakes in town. My arthritis neither improved nor worsened dramatically, remaining a daily companion that limited but didn't define me. The wealth from my grandfather's land provided security and comfort, but it was the relationships rebuilt from ashes that brought the deepest satisfaction. On my 70th birthday, Brandon presented me with a handmade album containing photographs spanning our journey together, from his childhood through our estrangement to our renewed connection. The final page held a recent photo of our extended family at Second Chances, everyone smiling beneath the neon sign. Below the photo he'd written, "True wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the courage to begin again after heartbreak. Thank you for teaching me that no one is too broken for redemption. Life offers no guarantees. Relationships fracture, health fails, security dissolves, sometimes with devastating speed. But within these painful truths lies a powerful possibility that our responses to life's harshest moments may ultimately define us more than the moments themselves. Sometimes being thrown away with just $10 can lead to discoveries we never imagined possible, not just of external resources but of internal strength we didn't know we possessed." If you're watching this and facing your own painful rejection or betrayal, remember that your story isn't finished. The next chapter might contain unexpected healing, not despite your wounds but because of how they've shaped you. Have you ever experienced betrayal that later led to something unexpectedly positive? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and unexpected second chances. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we think we've lost everything.